I know this review is super old. Apologies for that. I actually unboxed Final Fantasy XVI when the game came out for you guys, and I started playing the game not too long after that. But, during the month of July and August, I took a break from doing YouTube, and then some personal stuff happened, and it was kind of spontaneous, and it resulted in me taking this unofficial 2 month break from actually uploading any content. So here we are at the end of August. I completed Final Fantasy 16 back in July, so it's been a little over a month since I actually completed the game. Being that this is or was one of the most anticipated titles for a lot of people throughout the year, and that it's probably going to be on a lot of people's best games of the year list, I did want to actually give my thoughts officially on the game after all this time. As it was a game that I was somewhat excited for and was looking forward to. So thought I would upload my review, but I'm going to try and get through this rather quickly, being that it is somewhat older. So very briefly, let me talk about my history with the Final Fantasy franchise. I don't really have a deeply involved history with the games. I'm more of a sci-fi guy myself, which has kind of kept me away from the more Final Fantasy series, as it deals with fantasy, and a lot of kind of crazy stuff. Also, the turn-based gameplay wasn't really a thing for me. So the first official game that I played was Final Fantasy 13, which I appreciated the world. I liked the sort of style and the flair of the game, but I didn't really get too much involved with the game, probably because of that gameplay. It is a game that I would like to go back and play again, so maybe in the future I would do a reminiscing video on something like that. But the first game I really got involved with was the last game, Final Fantasy 15. And I unboxed the game for you guys. I did some demo gameplay and was actually very excited for the game, you could probably say. And I played it. I want to say I did a review, but overall I thought that the game was, good for what it was. It certainly felt like a game that went through a lot of different development cycles, a lot of different concepts and creative decisions that were kind of stripped out and brought in, and it was a game that probably was different, very different from the original idea and design, being that it was supposed to be attached to Final Fantasy XIII's world originally. But I enjoyed it for what it was. Final Fantasy VII's remake, though, back just a couple of years ago, I thought was excellent, and they found a way. I really like the gameplay of that game because they meshed the, more action-heavy gameplay that they created with Final Fantasy 15 with also the turn-based style gameplay of the past, and they found a way to mold the two of them together into this really cool, unique situation. So as you were doing combos, you could stop midway through the combo and do things like heal your party members, and you'd have to kind of pay attention to what people are doing, call on them to do special moves as well. And a lot of this seems like you'd have to micromanage a lot of your team, but they found a way to make it very accessible and very fun and engaging. And I just felt it was a very good game, very great experience. Love the story, love the visual style and everything that they pulled with it. But with Final Fantasy 16, excuse me, they decided to go with a more action-heavy game. They hired the combat director of the Devil May Cry series to kind of helm and lead the direct combat and gameplay for this game. And what we have here is basically a hack and slasher. That's kind of what it plays. It plays very similar to Devil May Cry, but I will say that there's a lot more detail here when it comes to the way that you want to play this game, because there's just a lot more variability with the upgrades and stuff that you can do. And so people's experience with the game might be slightly different depending on how they spec their character, but it's still very much an enjoyable game, and I really enjoyed the gameplay of this game. I still think that Final Fantasy VII's remake, though, was a bit better and more engaging when it came to the gameplay, the core gameplay of the game. But where that game was just a linear kind of straightforward game, this game is a little bit more open. It's not quite as open as Final Fantasy XV's open world, but you do have some exploration here, and it's an interesting balance between Final Fantasy VII's more, the remakes, it's more direct route versus the exploration of what you kind of had with Final Fantasy 15. So as you begin the game, the gameplay kind of starts off very slow. You'll be doing basic combos, you have basic blocks and basic dodges and stuff like that. And so, it kind of plays very slowly, but what happens is as you get through the game, and about a third of the way through the game, you'll find that you'll be able to spec out your character in kind of different and interesting ways. And so basically what's going on here is that your character is this interesting, special type of person, we'll just say, where he has the ability ability to basically consume other people's icons or abilities. Now, these are the big giant creatures, that are deeply in the lore of the Final Fantasy franchise, and they give basically these people, they're called dominants, the people who have the ability to call on these icons. They give the dominants special abilities and powers. And so your character has this unique ability to basically consume the icons or the power of the icons from the different dominants and to use them against his will. He is called Mythos, or Mythos, as the villain of the game likes to say. So he's this kind of, it's one of those more generic storylines. It's not super generic, but I will say that, it's your typical kind of setup where your character is like the chosen one, and he's set up to be like the savior of mankind, but he's built for a greater purpose. I will say that that is where the story kind of loses its flair. I'll get into that a little bit later, because I did actually enjoy the story of this game, but where this game falters is kind of based in its more cliche moments and the fact that, the game could do a little bit more with the structure of how it delivers a lot of its missions. So let me refocus back to the gameplay part. Basically, you'll be starting the game off in a rather kind of slow, repetitive fashion, let's just say, because the gameplay is very simple when they give you your basic combos, your basic dodges, your basic blocks, and you kind of just are expected to go in there and just do what you can. But again, as you progress through the game and you start to gain the ability of these different icons and abilities that come with that, at that point, the game really starts to open up, and this is where you can kind of do these crazy special moves and whatnot. There are, I think, 7 icons in the game total. I might be wrong on that, might be 8 or so, but you can only equip 3 of them. And of these 3 icons, you can only equip 2 of these powers. And you can spend your experience points upgrading these abilities and kind of unlocking new abilities to use. What I really like about this game, and speaking about the upgrade system very briefly, is that you can actually try some of these powers without having to really invest in them thoroughly. So let's say that you're really kind of interested in a particular icon's abilities and powers and their gameplay, but you don't know if it's really going to mesh well with the way that you personally play the combat of this game. What you can do is you can invest your points into upgrading those abilities, try them out, and if you decide, hey, this guy isn't really for me, or this type of gameplay isn't something that I'm interested in, you can actually remove those points and remove those upgrades, get those experience points back, and then reinvest them into something else that is more usable for your character. I found this a godsend for trying out new abilities and different gameplay pillars for how to approach different combat situations, because yeah, every icon's interesting in its own way, but they all have different abilities, and sometimes those abilities won't mesh well with what how you personally play the game. I'm the type of player that when it comes to these types of games, I like to do special abilities, but I also like to play very aggressively. I'm not someone who hangs back. I like to get up in the characters' faces and hack away as best as I can, do dodges, and I'm a very kind of quick-paced player. Not all of the icons are suited for that particular style of gameplay, and I was able to experiment with which ones worked best for me without having to really kind of work and invest and put all these points into one ability and then, oh, that's it, I'm never going to use this person again, so all that experience is lost. No, you can just take those points out and then reinvest them into something that is more meaningful. It was excellent in allowing me to really kind of utilize and pick out which abilities worked for me, and I feel that you're going to have a lot of people who are going to really kind of experiment with different abilities, but they're going to kind of nail down, depending on how they play the game, certain icons that work best for them. That is the best thing I can say about the gameplay of this game, is that it's variable, but it's also adaptive and doesn't get in the way of you trying to experiment and find out what works best for you when it comes to you investing these experience points. I had a good time with the gameplay of this game. Now, this is a more linear Final Fantasy. This isn't sort of like Final Fantasy 15 where they drop you in a large open world and you're kind of sitting here doing side missions. There is some exploration, and some of the worlds in this game are kind of vast and they are open, but it's nowhere near the scale of Final Fantasy 15. I have to say I like that. I'm not a big fan of everything going open world, and I like the sort of blend of kind of exploration, but more so a linear longer, I don't want to say a corridor type linear style game. You know, there's a general direction of where you're going, but it's just that as you're on your way to that objective, you might be able to take some detours that might lead you to, you know, maybe certain crafting components, chests, battling different enemies that will get you experience and stuff like that. So this game is a more linear game than Final Fantasy 15, but it's not as linear as the Final Fantasy 7 remake. It's kind of a mesh between the two, which I very much enjoyed. And I like the pacing of the game. I spent about 50 hours throughout the entire game. That resulted in me doing all the special hunts, which basically involve you fighting special creatures and unique creatures throughout the game world in order to kind of gain craftable materials. And you can use those craftable materials to upgrade your sword or upgrade your armor, craft new accessories that will give you buffs for combat or health depending on what you choose. And I also did all the side missions in the game as well. Now, the side missions are kind of hit and miss here. Sometimes they do an excellent job and they involve the characters that you're fighting alongside with the story, and they tell backstories and interesting side stories that kind of deepen your connection with these characters. Sometimes these side missions are great and they do service the actual story and they are worth playing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other side missions that have you basically running errands, going from one place to the other, delivering certain materials, or you talking to someone, and it's just a lot of gabbing. I have to be honest with you guys, I found myself just skipping a lot of the dialogue throughout this game, because if I didn't, I would be sitting there for like 10-15 minutes literally just watching dialogue and these people talking, you know, constantly and telling their whole life story. So not all the side missions are worth playing. I would say that the majority of them are unfortunately like that. It's only around 40 or 30% of the side missions that do a great job of actually, again, involving the characters that are actually in the story, telling their own kind of narrative that actually deepen your connection with these characters, deepen your knowledge of these characters, and they develop them further into people that you actually like and care about. And they just do an excellent job with that, but it's not the majority of the side missions. So there might be a guide somewhere about which side missions to do and which ones to completely ignore. Again, doing all the side missions and basically your reward for doing this outside of a narrative, for some of them at least, is just craftable components. And you use these crafting components to upgrade your gear and abilities, you know, the standard video game stuff. Doing all of them, I was able to get the best sword in the game, the best armor in the game. I was also doing all the hunts, so I was able to actually complete the game and get everything that I wanted to do and get the best gear possible in one playthrough. So it's not like you'll be having to play the game and then it's like, oh, do the new game plus in order to get these certain abilities, although there is that option if you want to unlock stuff and upgrade further. Talking briefly about the visual design of this game, it is a PlayStation 5 exclusive, and I'm not really sure what engine the game is running on. You know, the developers have been kind of tight-lipped on the game. I would say it was probably a modified, since this is the director of the Final Fantasy XIV Online MMO, it's probably a modified version of that engine. Now, this game doesn't immediately scream out to you as being an absolutely gorgeous game. However, there is a consistency to the presentation that I very much appreciated. Now, a lot of the stuff that is happening, a lot of the cutscenes in the game are actually real-time renderings. They're not all video files. And even the ones that are video files, there's no compression artifacts whatsoever. So you're watching this unfold and it looks like a native presentation that's actually being rendered in real time on your console in front of your eyes, and it just looks absolutely gorgeous. I think that this game looks very, very pretty. I played it on the Fidelity mode, which is the 30 FPS graphical mode for this game, which is a very stable 30 FPS. I experienced no dips playing this game whatsoever throughout my 50-hour experience. It was a perfectly smooth 30 FPS game. And yes, there is a performance mode in this game, which drops the resolution down to an upscaled 720p. And you have some performance dips when the game is not in its combat, at least from what I understand. But I felt the game was really beautiful. It ran very well and was optimized, at least in its graphics mode. And the detail that was there, again, you kind of have to look for it. You'll notice some things, but as I said before, there's a consistency to everything that I very much appreciated. This isn't the type of game where you're going to be noticing that things off in the distance that no one's ever going to look at is just undetailed or untextured. Everything seems like it has a really deep care and attention to detail put in. The lighting in this game is fantastic. It's not dynamic. It's not a real-time, lighting system or anything like that, but this is a very beautiful game, I think, that has a very consistent presentation. The character models in particular are very stylized, but they look very, very good. I do think that this game does utilize next generation detail and power very well, and they do present you with a very consistent, good looking image that I think will give you the impression of a next generation game. It just won't necessarily blow your socks off. So I very much like the game, like the visual style of this game. Again, it's more of a deeper fantasy aesthetic. Nothing like Final Fantasy 15 or Final Fantasy VII's kind of steampunk futuristic style, but what is here is consistent, it is well made, and I had no issues with the graphical presentation of this game. As I was watching the cutscenes unfold, it looks very cinematically, like, just competent. Like, it almost looks as good as I would say, it's on par, oddly enough, just in a different way, with the CGI presentations that we normally see with some of these older Final Fantasy games, where you look at the cutscenes and it's like, gosh, the CGI just looks insane. It almost looks on par with that, yet it's running in real time here. So there are ways that you can kind of appreciate the visual style of this game. Again, it's just not going to immediately jump out at you as you're playing the game. I think that you kind of have to, you'll be stopping and looking at certain details and parts of the world, and you'll be like, wow, that looks really good, or that looks really impressive, and everything about the game looks solid. There's nothing that looks particularly off, or just like nothing's had that much care or attention of detail put into. Even the side characters, they look pretty good overall. I also have to say that the music of this game is phenomenal. It has that same epic orchestral Final Fantasy soundtrack that you would expect from this franchise, and during the boss fights and stuff, they just go all out with the music, and it's excellent. It put a smile on my face throughout a lot of those fights. It made those fights seem just so much more infinitely epic than they probably were, and I just enjoyed playing the game. And as you're playing the game, doing these combos, all of a sudden it will dynamically, like at a moment's notice, shift into a more cinematic cutscene presentation, and it's all being done in real time. It's just super impressive. I had a great time watching this game as much as I was playing it, and being that there's 11 hours of cutscenes here, and definitely they utilize that time, I really had a good time watching the story sort of unfold. Again, it's a very cinematic game, but the gameplay is tailored in a way that is cinematic as well, especially because your character has the ability to basically summon these icons. You'll be playing as these massive creatures, and you're just like in this weird, it's almost like a Godzilla game or something like that, right? You're playing as these massive creatures in this type of style world, and you're like unleashing destruction everywhere. There's epic stuff happening, and then the music kind of chants up, and it creates this really kind of incredible presentation that I guess the only word to describe it is like cinema. It's very cinematic, but you're playing it in real time as well. They just did a great job with that entirely, and the music of this game just really does an excellent job of just making the emotional parts very emotional, but at the same time, when it gets epic, when it calls for a more action-focused theme, it just brings it up to another level. And I had a great time with the music of this game. It's awesome. So the last thing I want to touch upon is the story for this game. Now, this is a much darker Final Fantasy than I think any of the prior entries in this series. Like, they show some stuff, and there's a lot of stuff as you're playing this game that you're going to look at and you're just going to be like, wow. It's definitely earned its M rating here, and they utilize it to the full extent to deliver a story that deals with some very dark themes. And it's not just the subject matter, like there's some disgusting stuff in here as well. This is definitely an adult-oriented Final Fantasy game. It's none of this childish bullshit. There is stuff like full-on racism in this game, and not directly impacted at the color of people's skin, but stuff like of what people can do. So there's full-on racism in this game. You'll see children acting this way as well, and being completely, you'll see children being tortured and being abused. Like, I'm not even like sitting here like trying to over exaggerate. I really kind of appreciate it because it's what really kind of sold the atmosphere of this game, and they did a good job of showing a lot of this stuff and not necessarily telling it. You know, a lot of these games, what will happen is that they'll be too afraid to show some of the subject matter and stuff that goes into what makes the world the way it is. And so what happens is they'll say, oh, this happened off screen, isn't that terrible? And then, you know, that's what you'll hear throughout the game, but you'll never see it. In Final Fantasy XVI, you're actually watching it unfold. There's some side missions in this game where, you know, like again, children are involved, like small children, and it's just kind of blew my mind, the stuff that they were doing, and the dialogue and stuff that was being shared. So just be prepared for that. Is that there's a lot of stuff in here that you may not have expected, but it really utilizes its dark fantasy themes. It really does. Again, lots of blood and gore. Definitely, you know, there's some really dark stuff that happens. Violence is pretty heavy. Yes, you'll be fighting these creatures, and you know, I think that as a whole, it doesn't necessarily do anything like shock value. This isn't like The Last of Us Part 2 levels of gritty, realistic violence. But what is here is, again, it's much more mature. It's much more suited towards an adult audience. There's sexual themes. There's all this type of other stuff. This actually kind of interweaves itself into the story because it does tell a darker story, but where it falters is lending into the kind of cliche tropes that you would normally expect a story like this to unfold. So it does that thing where your character is the chosen one. He's here to save the world, or he's created for a purpose. And, you know, it delves into some religious themes as well. So, you know, it kind of jumps around towards the end. I would say that definitely the interest and, you know, what I was hoping the story was going to unfold into, it definitely kind of loses me a bit there as it kind of settles for more tropey, generic type storylines and themes. So it feels like almost the game kind of set itself up to be a lot more interesting than it turned out to be. But overall, I enjoyed this story for what it was. Again, watching the cutscenes unfold, the characters, I cared about a lot of them. I enjoyed the camaraderie. The main character, Clive, he's a you know, decent guy, you know, I would say. It's not as charismatic as some of the people that we've seen with Final Fantasy 15, and there are some charismatic people in this game and some of the side characters, but I enjoyed Clive as a character. I thought he was inoffensive and, you know, wasn't anything particularly special in terms of his development, but I think an appreciable hero that you could watch and, you know, root for when it comes to the actual core of the story itself. I just wish that the story kind of delved into something more interesting, especially towards the end where it gets a little bit generic with its themes and doesn't kind of hold up to all the kind of interesting other stuff that it kind of showed before. So overall, I have to say that Final Fantasy XVI is a great game. It's a great experience. I have to say overall, though, I enjoyed Final Fantasy VII's remake a lot better. That game really blew me away. It had an exciting finale, exciting gameplay, and was cinematically epic. This, in a way, kind of combines the cinematic flair of Final Fantasy VII with the more action-focused gameplay of 15, and does it in a way where it's all in real time. So you're playing this game and it feels very cinematic as you're kind of playing it. So I very much appreciate it for that aspect. Probably, yes, definitely one of the better games that came out this year, but I don't think it blew me away in quite the way that I was hoping for it would be, especially when it came to the story and it kind of ended in the way that it did. You know, it kind of gets a bit tropey towards the latter half of the storyline, but again, it's still a very much enjoyable game, and I had a great time playing it, and I do recommend it if you do have a PS5. Should be coming to PC sometime next year, I hear, and who knows what's going on with Xbox in this franchise. But anyway, I enjoyed Final Fantasy XVI very much so. Not as good as the 7 remake, but not too far off either, and I feel like the gameplay, you know, They took a chance here going with a more action focused game. It's definitely a lot more accessible. The game doesn't really overwhelm you with a lot of abilities. You know, you can make this game kind of simplistic, and there's a lot of different things that you can equip that will help the gameplay side of it feel a lot better to play and a lot more accessible. So if you're just kind of getting into the franchise for the first time, this is a good starter point. Just keep in mind that some of those side missions you're going to want to ignore because they don't lead anywhere. And the story itself, you'll enjoy watching it unfold. Just don't have these wild expectations about what might actually happen because it doesn't really lead through on some of those. So, all right, I'll talk with you guys later. I hope you guys very much enjoyed this review, and if you guys played Final Fantasy XVI, let me know what you think as well, and we'll talk then. Have a good one.